Are you more of an artist than a scientist, or which?
I'm working in both cases with imagination.
Would you say as a scientist you had more imagination?
No, but it works in a different way. Often one thinks of science as dealing with properties and art as dealing with qualities. But properties have a quality all of their own.
So when you are making one or the other, where do you begin? Different places?
Well, I usually begin where I don't know something and try and progress until I do.
Is that the same with your artistic endeavours?
Not quite. I think that the way I work as an artist is that I notice something that I think is interesting, and then I have the job, like any other artist, of inventing a way to make it visible to other people.
Can you give an example of both kinds of activity?
I suppose that if I notice that there is double vision with something and I can fuse it to make a more enhanced image of something, I will then try and design a device. And by device I mean an object that will replicate that experience for the public. In the case of making an optical device or a scientific device, I try and isolate the properties that it seems to me are new or original, and then I design the device so that it makes something that was hard to see easy to see.
And how many of these optical devices have you made?
5.
And what are their names?
The first one is a pseudoscope that increases the space between your eyes so that your cortex has more difference to compute a more defined and detailed stereo experience. Once I was successful with that, I then thought, I wonder what the world would look like if my eyes changed sides. And so I developed at first a prismatic device, and it worked, but it was not powerful enough so that the strangeness of pseudoscopic vision was unmistakable, and I developed a mirror version of the pseudoscope that does just that. And then I began to think, what other kinds of modifications can I make to perception? So I designed a device called a cyclopter, meaning it was simply what the world would look like if we just had one eye in the middle of our heads. And then I began to think, what if I were to make a device that moved one eye up and one eye down so that I could see the curvature on a ball that had a radius of 4,000 miles. In other words, the Earth. And I found out that I needed a displacement vertically of over 20 feet. And yet it did work, and I could see the curvature of the Earth effectively. And there is a fifth device called a gyroscope that I borrowed a generator from one of the laboratories at the university where I was working at the time. And I managed to sit in a neighbour's window that had a good view of a road, and I found out that a useful frequency was about 200 oscillations a minute and amplitude of about 3 mil. I could, by varying the frequency, watch cars go past and see their wheels reversing or going forward, much as I liked. This is the hyperscope, and you can see that if I hold it to my eyes like this, the mirrors have the effect of increasing the distance between my eyes from here, 63 or 4 mil, which is normal, out to 250 mil at this distance, and that produces a very enhanced stereoscopic image. This is a pseudoscope, and this works by making a left eye into a right eye and a right eye into a left eye, and that turns space back to front and is very interesting and rewarding to see. Next device is a cyclopter, which uses a semi-silvered mirror, so that when you look through this, it commons both the optical paths. So you look into it with two eyes and out through one optical path, in which you see depth, but not stereo. This is an upside down scope that turns space upside down simply by using a hypotenuse prism. Very simple device, but very effective. This is a device known as the eye bender, and it is a hyperscope and pseudoscope in one. This configuration, it's a pseudoscope, and by sliding the mask like that, it becomes a hyperscope. You might be interested to know that the Patent Office requested an identification number for it, and I made it, since it's an eye bender, I thought that it could be EB, and because it's a British patent, that could be followed by GB, and it becomes EBGB.
Did they get the joke?
No.
Oh dear.
Still no humour.
How many of these did you patent?
I wrote 9 patents altogether, but they went all for optical devices. The other patents were for, one was for a telescope that was designed for children that turned into a microscope, and another one was for an adhesive tape that was calibrated, and a fourth one was for a potential checkout for supermarkets, so that you wouldn't have to unload the contents of a trolley onto the deck. But I was unable to get anywhere with that.
So you've become a very rich man because of all the patents?
I would have, but I didn't. At the moment, the optical devices are being made by a company called Mindsets that's run by Middlesex University, and I do get royalties twice a year, but it's not major amounts of money. But it's also quite amusing, because some of the people who buy them are quite well-known people, like Steve Wozniak, for one of the 2 founders of Apple. He bought a pseudoscope. And I also suspect from some of the addresses that comes with the royalty payments that I get, that some of my ex-students are buying them too.
That's good. It sounds like my books.
Yeah.
Have you made more money then out of your constructivist works? Or is it constructionist?
Constructionist work, yes, I have. But my sales record is very patchy and quite small, really. First of all, I don't view the production of art as a form of light industry, and I think that galleries are maybe slower to show constructionists, because in general their output, compared with some painters, is quite small, and they don't feel that they're going to have the turnover that they might like.
So how did you choose to be a constructivist?
I started making objects to deal with spatial volume before I knew about the existence of constructionist work as such. And I had a very interesting first year as a student at Corsham. And towards the end of my first year, I was walking back to the hostel, and the tutor, whose name I didn't know, came up to me and said, "How are things going?" Well, I said, "They're going fine." And he said, "Will you be doing sculpture or painting in your second year?" I said, "Well, actually, I don't want to do either. I'm interested in space." And he said, "Well, there are people who might be interested in doing that because they already work that way." And I was simultaneously happy to know other people had had similar ideas, but at the same time I was slightly sorry because until then I thought it was my own special idea. Nevertheless, when I returned to Corsham for the second year in the autumn, I found that I had been put down to work in a studio with the painter, a young Howard Hodgkin, and I knew I didn't want to do that. But I had heard that an interesting person had been met at the Camden Arts Centre earlier in the year, and he was starting to teach in one of the other studios. So I just went there, and it happened to be the constructionist John Ernest, who we straight away spoke the same language. I was very lucky to meet somebody who was able to offer me the kind of discipline and critical apparatus that has stood me in good stead.
Yeah, it's interesting that you work in science and art with materials which are similar.
Yes.
So a lot of your art is coming through from playing with those materials.
Well, I suppose, like a lot of people my age, I grew up looking through Superman and Batman comics in 3D, and so I knew something about the way the two eyes operated so that you could have images of space. And I invented, using originally a pair of headphones, the first optical device, because I wanted to see what the world looked like if my eyes were in different positions. And it fitted on my head. It had two big round black mirrors sticking out, so that in those days I had a lot of dark hair, and from behind I looked like Mickey Mouse, so it made it hard to get people to take me seriously. But nevertheless, the device worked, and seeing this enhanced space for the first time was like breathing pure oxygen. And I then began developing better ways of making the device so that the experience could be shared and anyone could see it immediately.
What is, do you think, the future for constructionism?
Any predictions about the future of anything are difficult, because predictions are by their very nature linear, whereas the real future is exponential. But there is a halfway point in between in which you can guess with some of the things that are happening now that are not connected. When they will be connected, will make a new activity. New talent will recognize the potential of formal activity, and there are young constructionists working. At the moment there's Carol Gray, whom I know, and Kevin Corbett. I think that one will have to start to consider what might be the impact of artificial intelligence upon art. I suspect that art will be the last redoubt of human ideas before it takes over. It's unfamiliar to us to have company that has a higher cognitive capacity than our own, and it might be difficult for us to deal with. I suspect it will, but at the same time it does offer many opportunities. I think that new materials will have an impact. I am looking at materials at the moment, including this foam, which is known as an open foam, and I find it very engaging, the way it breaks up images, and I'm trying to identify what it is that's engaging about it so that I might be able to use it expressively. This is a larger piece of it, which I have had cut to a very definite size, and I'm hoping before very long to start producing new work that uses this material. But at the same time, ideas motivate one very rapidly, of course, and then one has the feedback, and when you're working, you tend to treat yourself half the time as a spectator, saying to yourself, what will someone see next? Where will their attention go then? What experience do I want them to have? And then you revert to the role of a creator, and you try and find a new way of directing attention at something rewarding, and ultimately you hope that you can refine this activity and produce an object that will deliver new experiences to people. Not necessarily straight away, but if they are prepared to persist in testing the potential of such an object.
I wonder, think about AI again. Do you think intuition might be our saving grace?
Very difficult to know. If we are in the company of superintelligence, it might be rather disheartening at first. We'll have to wait and see. I don't know. I mean, already I think that it's potentially could burst upon the scene any time now.
Yes. Anything else you'd like to say?
Yes.
Oh, you met Escher, didn't you?
When I was a student in Holland, I was supervised by a Dutch synthesist, constructionist called Joost Ballieu, and I was asked by the Ministry of Education when I was there who I would like to meet, and among other people, I didn't ever meet a Rembrandt, I never met a Van Gogh, I never met a Vermeer, but I did meet a Van Eyck, who was an architect, but I also mentioned that I was interested in the work of Escher. Now, in 1962, Escher had nothing like the standing that he does these days, and a great deal of his standing is really the result of scientists being grateful for the visual metaphors that he produces that deal with different scientific ideas. I did ask if I could go and see him, and they made the arrangement for me, and he lived in a little village called Barn, just outside Utrecht. And I just regret that I didn't mention to him the work I had been doing with pseudoscopes, because I later on found out that he had a prismatic pseudoscope that had been made for him by a mathematical friend. And it would have been a very useful thing, because he was a rather wiry but very courteous person. And later on I discovered that some of the content of his work, such as Impossible Objects and the piece of work called Belvedere, which has the endless waterfall, in fact had been input from the Penroses. And in 1948, Lionel Penrose had gone to a conference in Holland with his son Roger, and they, during a lunchtime break, had walked around the block and had passed a gallery with some of Escher's etchings. And they asked the gallery owner for details to contact him and went to see Escher. And they got on very well. And Escher and Lionel Penrose, and presumably Roger as well, decided that when they parted that they would try and invent an impossible object. Well, young Roger Penrose was about to go to Cambridge to do his tripos, and found one day that he was able to draw what is called now the tribar. It exploits the potential of conventions of describing three space on a flat surface, and he posted this to his father back in Oxford. His father immediately recognized the potential and then designed the endless staircase. Both of these drawings they then sent to Escher, who immediately produced the Belvedere. And it's rather exciting to think that things work that way.
Yes, for mathematics.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you very much indeed, Terry. That's excellent. It has to get ready. I'll go in for a close-up. Okay, go.
I would just like to add that I do not actually consider Escher to be an artist. I think of him as a very gifted draftsman.
But doesn't drawing come under the heading of art?
It does, but his work doesn't go far enough, in my opinion, into the kind of human spirit that you find in important works of art by people like Turner, Pier della Francesca, and Vermeer.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you.